Some invitations are not sent out of kindness. Some are sent like a knife, wrapped in cream cardstock, sealed with a gold wax stamp, addressed in calligraphy so perfect it almost looks forgiving. They arrive on your doorstep in the morning, while you are still in the soft middle of your day, before you have your armor on. And the person who sent them is counting on exactly that. They are counting on the particular vulnerability of a Tuesday morning, on the fact that you will open it without thinking, without bracing, without the 3 seconds of preparation that might have made the difference between reading it and surviving it cleanly. Imani Brooks received hers on a Tuesday. She was standing in a kitchen that was not hers, in a penthouse that was not hers, making breakfast for 2 4-year-olds who were very much not hers, and yet were, in every way that mattered, entirely hers, when the courier knocked. She signed for the envelope without suspicion. She opened it while the eggs were still on the stove. And then she stood there in that immaculate kitchen on the 42nd floor of one of the most expensive buildings in Manhattan, and she read the words, and the eggs burned, and the twins watched from their high chairs, and the whole morning collapsed into the 6 words on that card: Marcus Allen and Jordan Pierce. Request the honor of your presence. She could have thrown it away. She could have called in sick, stayed home Saturday, pulled the covers over her head until the weekend was over and the whole thing had happened without her. That would have been the sensible, self-protective thing to do. That would have been the choice of a woman who had already cried all her tears over this particular wound and had no intention of reopening it for other people's benefit. But Imani had never been especially interested in self-protection. And then there was Taeyang-oh, her employer, her carefully maintained professional boundary, the man she had spent 8 months telling herself she did not think about. He walked into the kitchen at exactly the wrong moment. Or, and this is the part that takes the story somewhere worth going, exactly the right one. What happened at that rooftop wedding in the heart of Manhattan, with 2 small children who said the word that stopped the room, and a man who had forgotten how to want things until he remembered? That story is not about revenge. Not really. It is about what happens when the people who tried to make you small forget that smallness was never something you were built for. It is about what becomes possible when the wound finally closes. If you love stories about resilience, slow burn romance, and the universe making things right in ways you never planned, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. And before we start, drop a comment. What would you have done with that invitation? I want to know. Now, let's get into it. The penthouse at 432 Park was the kind of place that existed in a register of wealth so quiet it didn't need to announce itself. No gold fixtures. No oversized art purchased by the square foot. Just clean architectural lines. Floor-to-ceiling windows that made the whole of Manhattan feel like something curated specifically for the residents' private viewing. And the particular stillness of a space where every object had been placed with intention, and nothing, absolutely nothing, was superfluous. Imani Brooks had been working there for 8 months, and she still hadn't gotten used to the view. She had arrived in February, midwinter, fresh off a job that had ended when her previous charge started kindergarten and the family relocated to London. She had been 31, good at her work, with a graduate degree in early childhood development that she sometimes used as a shield when people at dinner parties asked what she did and looked faintly surprised when she said nanny. She had learned to say it without the defensiveness, which had taken longer than the degree. The interview with Taeyang-oh had lasted 45 minutes. He had asked precise, non-standard questions. Not about her approach to discipline or her views on screen time, though those came up, but about how she handled transitions, how she responded to a child who was grieving something they couldn't name, how she thought about the difference between comforting a child and solving a problem for one. She had answered honestly, because she had learned that there was no useful point in performing anything in a job interview that would require you to perform it every day afterward. He had offered her the position at the end of the meeting, with the same directness with which he appeared to do most things. She had accepted. What she had not known, in that initial 45 minutes, was the full weight of what the job carried. She knew the basics from the brief: twins, boy and girl, just turned 4. Father a fintech entrepreneur, frequently traveling, requiring a nanny who could function with autonomy. She had not known that the mother was gone. Not gone as in absent, not gone as in divorced or traveling herself, but gone as in the permanent, irreversible kind of gone that restructures everything around it. She found out the way you find out things like that in a household. Gradually, by accumulation. A photograph on a shelf with a specific kind of stillness around it. The way the children sometimes stopped mid-play and went quiet for a moment, as if something had passed through the room. The way Taeyang-o stood, sometimes, in the doorway of the twins' bedroom at night, not going in, not leaving, just holding the doorframe like a man who had learned to love from the outside of rooms, because the inside of them was still too full of someone else. She had not spoken of it. Neither had he. That was the unspoken architecture of the arrangement. She cared for his children with everything she had, and he maintained the structured distance of an employer who paid well and never, ever intruded. And in the margins of that arrangement, in the corners and the early mornings, and the unremarkable moments that nobody catalogs, something else had been building for months, that both of them had been treating as if it did not exist. The children themselves had no such discipline. Seo-jun and Hana, were 4 years old and already fully formed personalities with strong aesthetic opinions and no tolerance for ambiguity. Seo-jun was the kind of child who approached every task with the focused aggression of a small engineer. Puzzles, block towers, the arrangement of his breakfast foods into quadrants. He had recently developed a devotion to a navy blazer that Imani suspected was less about the blazer and more about the feeling of having a uniform, of being the kind of person who wore a blazer. Hana was his mirror and his opposite. Where he went quiet and concentrated, she narrated. She offered commentary on every event in their shared life, from the interesting to the mundane, with the confidence of someone whose observations were worth hearing. She had strong views. The strongest, most consistent, most non-negotiable of these views was that her eggs must be cut into triangles. Not squares, not rectangles, triangles. She had explained this to Imani on day 2 with a gravity that suggested it was fundamental truth rather than preference. Imani had cut eggs into triangles every Wednesday morning for 8 months. She did not consider this a hardship. It was on a Tuesday in October, French Toast Day, Hana's second favorite morning, when the courier knocked. She signed for the envelope while the bread was soaking. She tore it open while she was checking the stove. She read the first line and thought she had misread it, which is what the mind does when it encounters something it hasn't prepared for. It assumes error, because error is recoverable. She read it again, Marcus Allen and Jordan Pierce. Together, the way those names hadn't appeared to her in 11 months, not since the morning she had finally understood what had been happening and had put her phone face down on her kitchen table and sat there for a very long time. The smell of burning was the first thing that reached her. Then Hana's voice saying, Imani, with the specific urgency of a child who has identified a problem and expects the adult to act on it immediately. Then the sound of the pan hitting the back burner, which she must have moved without registering it. She stood at the stove with the invitation in her hands and did not move. Marcus had been her partner for 3 years. She had been 28 when they met, 29 when she understood that she loved him in the particular way that reorganizes things, the kind of love that makes you rearrange your future to include another person in it. They had been together until 14 months ago, which meant she was now 31, and he was getting married to Jordan Pierce in 6 days at a rooftop venue in Midtown, and she had been invited to watch Jordan, who had been her best friend since they were 19 years old. Jordan, who had spent the first month after Marcus left calling her every evening, patient and warm and furious on her behalf. Jordan, who had apparently been seeing Marcus for nearly a year before Imani found out, which meant the phone calls and the patience and the fury had all been performed from the other side of the betrayal. That was the part that still had the sharpest edge, not the losing of Marcus, who had turned out to be smaller than she had believed him to be. The losing of Jordan, of 19 years of friendship and all the accumulated history that went with it, was the wound that didn't show from the outside. She had not spoken to either of them in 11 months, and now they had sent her a wedding invitation, addressed to her, her name, written in calligraphy on cream cardstock. Not a mistake, not a clerical accident, a choice, made deliberately, calculated to land exactly where it had landed, in her chest, at 7:15 in the morning, while she was unprepared. She knew Marcus. She knew what the invitation was. It was not an olive branch. It was not guilt made material. It was a dare. The specific, cruel dare of a man who needed to know that he had won, who needed to see her standing in a room full of their shared history, watching him choose someone else permanently, publicly, in front of witnesses. He wanted to know that it hurt. He wanted the proof. Imani. She turned. Taeyang was in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for his morning. Dark trousers, a pale shirt, the particular composure he wore at 7 a.m. that sometimes made her wonder if he slept in it. He was looking at her with the focused attention he applied to situations he was assessing, which was a different thing from the polite, managed attention of normal mornings. His eyes went to her face, then to the card in her hands, then to the burned pan. The stove. His voice was quiet, even, "It's off." Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. He crossed the kitchen. She tensed, expecting him to reach past her for coffee and retreat. That was the normal choreography. Instead, he stopped beside her, picked up the invitation she had set on the counter, and read it. She watched his face. He had an excellent face for not showing things, but she had been watching it for 8 months, and she caught the slight compression at the jaw. He set the card face down on the counter. It was such a small, deliberate gesture, the quiet refusal to leave those names face up in the room, that it took her completely off guard. Your ex. And my former best friend. Yes. A silence. From the high chairs, both children were watching this exchange with enormous interest. Seo-jun had stopped moving his fork entirely. Hana's bread sat untouched, which was unprecedented. When is it? Saturday. He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet she had learned meant he was not evading. He was selecting. Then, "You're going." Not a question, not a suggestion. A statement delivered with the calm certainty of someone who had already run the numbers and arrived at the only logical conclusion. "Excuse me. You are going to that wedding, and I am taking you." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, 42 floors below, Manhattan went about its Tuesday morning entirely indifferent to the conversation happening in this room. Hana reached over and patted her brother's arm. Seo-jun, not taking his eyes off the adults, patted her back. She said no. She said it clearly, with full sentences, while loading the dishwasher. She explained that she was a professional in his employ, and it was not appropriate for him to involve himself in her personal circumstances. She explained that she did not need to go to the wedding. She explained that she was fine. She used the word twice, once with more emphasis than was probably convincing, and that Saturday would be a perfectly ordinary day that she intended to spend doing things that were not attending the marriage of her ex-partner to her former best friend. Taeyang listened to all of this. He stood by the counter with his coffee and said nothing, and gave her absolutely nothing to push against, which was the most infuriating possible response. When she was done, he said, "Think about what you actually want," and went to his office and closed the door. She thought about it for the entire day. She thought about it through the morning, while she tidied the living room and Seo-jun arranged and rearranged a set of wooden blocks into structures that he evaluated, dismantled, and rebuilt with the focus of a small architect who was not satisfied with his own work. She thought about it while Hana sat beside her and narrated her own drawing in real time. This is a house, and this is a dog. And the dog is sad because the house doesn't have a door. Now the house has a door. Now the dog is happy. The kind of running commentary that should have been exhausting, and instead felt like the most grounding thing in her life. She thought about it on the walk to music class in the West Village. October in New York had that quality of very clear light and cold air that makes the city look more itself than usual. Every edge sharpened, every color more deliberate. Seo-jun walked fast, which was his default setting. Hana preferred to observe and comment, which made their transit approximately twice as long as necessary and significantly more interesting. They passed a dog in a jacket. Hana had feelings about this. Seo-jun took it as evidence that animals could have uniforms, which confirmed things he already believed. In music class, in the bright basement room that smelled of wood polish and dry erase markers, Seo-jun attacked a xylophone with focused precision. Hana played the same 3 notes on a small upright piano in the corner, over and over, and each time she played them she nodded at the piano as if the piano had done something she approved of. The teacher, a patient woman named Gloria who had seen every kind of 4-year-old, caught Imani's eye and smiled. Imani smiled back and thought, "What do I actually want?" The honest answer arrived on the walk home, Hana's hand in her left and Seo-jun's in her right, crossing Columbus Circle in the October light with the park on one side and the city on the other. She did not want to spend Saturday in her apartment knowing the wedding was happening. She had tried that strategy with smaller things, birthdays, mutual friends, events. And what she had learned was that avoidance did not protect you from the fact of the thing. It just made you alone with it. She did not want Marcus to have the narrative he had constructed. The one where she was somewhere quietly sad, where the invitation had landed with the precision he intended, where she had received the message that she had been weighed, found insufficient, replaced, and accepted it. That was the story he had written for her, and she was tired, so tired, of inhabiting other people's stories about who she was. And underneath all of that, in the quietest place, she wanted to walk into a room that was supposed to diminish her and not be diminished. She wanted, just once, for the architecture of someone else's cruelty to collapse under the weight of her simple refusal to disappear. She came home and put the children down for their nap and knocked on Taeyang's office door. He looked up from 3 open screens. He had the expression of a man who had been waiting, not impatiently, but waiting nonetheless. She knocked on his office door. "What are the terms?" Something moved through his face, the barest rearrangement of an expression that was usually very still. Not satisfaction, exactly. Something more disciplined than satisfaction. The look of a man who is right and has sufficient control not to make it a production. "We go as a family unit. You, me, the children. We arrive after the ceremony has begun, late enough to be seen, not so late as to be disruptive. We stay no longer than 2 hours. You do not explain yourself to anyone, and neither do I. And after Saturday, if you want to proceed as though this conversation never happened, I will accommodate that entirely." She considered this. Why would you do this? He was quiet for a moment. Then, because people who send that kind of invitation are making a calculation. They are assuming the recipient will arrive alone, or not at all. I find it useful to disappoint that kind of assumption. She waited for more. He said nothing else, which meant either that was the complete reason, or there were reasons he hadn't elected to name. She filed that away. "The children can't stay with Mrs. Kim. Mrs. Kim has her niece's recital Saturday evening. I checked. A beat. And Seo-jun has been asking to wear his blazer somewhere appropriate. He considers this urgent." She had not expected that. The laugh came out before she could manage it. Small and entirely genuine, the kind that surprises you. And she covered her mouth, and Taeyang watched her laugh with an expression that was not laughing but was not laughing either. It was something careful and warm that he was managing very precisely. "Fine," she said, when she had recovered. "Saturday, 2 hours. But I want to be clear. I'm not going as your date. I'm the nanny, accompanying the family to an event." "Understood. And you don't get to be pleased with yourself about this." "I'm never pleased with myself." "You're quietly pleased with yourself constantly. It's one of your most pronounced qualities." He looked at her for a moment. Then he turned back to his screens with the deliberateness of a man who has decided not to answer that, But she caught the corner of his mouth. Just the corner. Just for a half second. Doing something that was the minimum viable version of a smile. She went back to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall, and thought about the fact that she had just agreed to bring her employer to her ex's wedding as a statement of psychological warfare, and was somehow, underneath the anxiety of that, aware of a feeling she had not had in a very long time. Something like looking forward to something. She told herself it didn't matter what she wore. She spent 40 minutes with her closet anyway. The emerald dress. The one she had bought last year for a gallery opening that she had ultimately not attended because Marcus had said he was tired, and she had stayed home with him, and then found out 6 weeks later that he had not been tired. He had been elsewhere, came out first and was immediately returned to the hangar on principle. Then it came out again, because principles are one thing, and emerald is another. And she had bought the dress with her own money, and Marcus no longer had any authority over what colors she wore to events. The dress stayed. She did her hair slowly, carefully, in the way that Jordan had always said looked best. She caught herself thinking of Jordan while doing this, and then continued anyway. Because Jordan's opinion about her hair had been accurate before it became complicated, and accuracy didn't expire retroactively. She put on the earrings her grandmother had left her, small, gold, warm, and looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. She looked like someone going somewhere. That was enough. When she came into the living room, both children were already dressed and already at the boundary of what they could contain. Seojun's blazer was on and incorrectly buttoned. He had done it himself and refused all correction. And he was standing by the window pointing out buildings to no one in particular. Hana was in a white dress with a yellow sash and had the expression of someone who was aware of how good she looked and was sitting with the responsibility of that. She was 4 years old. She was completely correct about herself. "You look beautiful," Imani told her. Hana received this information with gracious solemnity. "I know," she said. "You look beautiful too." Seojun turned from the window to assess. "You look nice," he said, with the careful precision of someone who understood that beautiful and nice were different words and was choosing correctly. Then he turned back to the window. She heard Taeyang before she saw him, the particular sound of his footsteps, which she had memorized without meaning to. He came from the hallway, and all three of them looked. He was wearing a dark suit, charcoal, not black, with a tie the color of deep water. This was not, objectively, an extraordinary thing. He wore suits. She saw him in suits regularly. And yet, there was something about this specific evening, this specific version of him walking into this room where she was standing in green, that made the normal architecture of the moment feel different in a way she could not immediately account for. "Imani looks pretty," Hana announced, with the authority of someone issuing a formal statement. Taeyang's attention moved from the children to Imani. He looked at her, a single, composed beat of looking, and she braced for the polite deflection, for the professionalism, for the careful management of whatever that look was. "She does," he said simply, without decoration, without management. Then he looked at his son's blazer and said, "Seojun, every button is wrong." And the moment dissolved into the full productive chaos of a 4-year-old defending his sartorial choices to a father who was trying not to smile. And Imani turned to the window and looked at the city, and quietly allowed herself 30 seconds of something she refused to name. The car ride was oddly peaceful. Hana fell asleep approximately 12 blocks from home, in the abrupt way of children who decide sleep is immediately necessary and commit to it fully. Seojun sat with his hands in his lap and watched the city go by with the serious face of a person reviewing a report. Taeyang sat beside her, the children between them in their car seats, the adults at the far ends of the back seat, and didn't speak, and neither did she. And the silence was the comfortable kind, which was a thing she had stopped expecting from most people a long time ago. At one point, he said, "Are you prepared?" Not asking about nerves, asking something more precise. She thought about it. "I think so. Are you?" He seemed briefly surprised by the question being returned. "A beat. I've been in rooms with people who wanted to see me fail, I am comfortable with that. This isn't your battle. No, but I'm here. She looked out the window at the city and did not answer, because there was nothing to say to that wouldn't cost her more than she had budgeted for the evening. The summit at 42 floors was the kind of venue that had been designed to make ordinary life feel inadequate by comparison. The rooftop terrace opened onto an unobstructed view of Midtown that, on a clear October evening with the light going gold and the city doing what New York does at dusk, becoming, briefly, the most beautiful version of itself, was the kind of view you remembered. The flowers were white and ivory. The candles were real. The guests were the kind of well-dressed that looks effortless and takes enormous effort. They arrived 7 minutes after the start time. This had been Tae Yang's choice, made in the car with a specificity that told her he had thought about it. You don't arrive before the room is full, he had said. You arrive when attention has already organized itself, and then you redirect it. She had not asked how he knew this. She was beginning to suspect Tai Yang-o had been conducting strategic entrances for most of his adult life. The elevator opened. They stepped out. She felt the room register them before she had fully processed the room. It moved through the crowd the way a current moves through water. Not dramatic, just directional. Heads turning, eyes finding them, recalibrating. Because what they saw was not what they had been set up to see. They had been set up by Marcus's careful social architecture, by the story he had been telling for 11 months, to see a woman arrive quietly, alone, swallowed by a room that would remind her of everything she no longer had. What they saw was Imani Brooks in emerald, standing between a man whose name half the room would eventually place, and 2 small children in their very best clothes, one of whom had a slightly misbuttoned blazer and was looking at the rooftop with the expression of someone who has arrived somewhere he considers appropriate. Hana took Imani's hand. Seo Jun took his father's. She found Marcus without looking for him. The same way she always had. Her eyes simply knew where he was in a room, from 3 years of practice that the body didn't unlearn easily. He was near the bar, drink in hand, and the moment he saw her, his face did something involuntary. A flicker of recalculation, there and gone, but she caught it. Jordan was beside him. She saw Imani a beat later, and what moved across her face was more complex and harder to read. But it was not, Imani noted, guilt. It was something more calculating than guilt. A reassessment. Tae Yang's hand came to the small of her back. The lightest possible contact. Nothing that could be called a statement. Nothing that announced itself, but warm and present, and entirely deliberate. Breathe, he said, low, close to her ear. She breathed, and they walked into the room. The ceremony was beautiful in the cold, architectural way that expensive things are beautiful when the people inside them are less certain of each other than the flowers suggest. The officiant had a voice trained for exactly this purpose. The vows were written, not improvised. She could tell by the rhythm, the careful construction. And they were good vows, really. The kind you could believe if you didn't know the history. Imani stood near the back, where the chairs thinned out, and there was space for the children to shift position without disturbing anyone. Hana had decided partway through the ceremony that leaning against Imani's side was preferable to her own standing space, and had migrated there by degrees until she was essentially held. Seo Jun stood on Imani's other side, very straight, watching the proceedings with the face of someone taking notes. Tai Yang was just behind her. She could feel him there the way you feel something that is part of the room's architecture. Steady, warm, present in a way that went beyond the physical. She watched Marcus say his vows. She had anticipated devastation. She had been preparing for it all week, in the back of her mind, building the mental architecture to absorb a blow. What she found instead was something so unexpected that it took her a moment to identify it. Relief. Not the relief of escape, the relief of completion. Of a chapter that had been half open for over a year finally. In front of all these witnesses. Closing. The sadness was still there. But it was the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't ask anything of you. Not the loud kind. Not the kind she had been dreading. She hadn't known there was a difference until she felt it. During the cocktail hour, when the ceremony space emptied onto the terrace, and the crowd rearranged itself into the social clusters of people who know each other and people who are pretending to, Marcus found her. She had expected this. It was in the logic of the evening, in the reason the invitation had been sent. He had arranged all of this, and now he needed to be present for the moment he had arranged. Taeyang had taken the children to the dessert table, a mission that Seo-jun had volunteered for with suspicious speed, suggesting he had been aware of its existence for some time. And for a moment, she was at the terrace railing with the city below her and Marcus beside her, and it was just the two of them in the old, uncomfortable configuration of people who used to know each other very well. "You look good," he said, the same tone he had always used when he was managing a moment rather than inhabiting one. "Thank you," she said. "Congratulations." A pause. He had not expected that. She could see the recalibration, the slight adjustment of a man whose script has encountered an unexpected line. "I wasn't sure you'd come. You sent me an invitation, Marcus. Still, I wasn't sure." He looked out at the city, doing the thing he did when he wanted to seem reflective. "You look different. You seem different." Different how? He didn't answer immediately. She could feel him looking at her the way you look at something you thought you understood and are realizing you didn't. "I thought you'd be..." He stopped. "Devastated?" He said nothing, which was its own answer. "I was," she said, without anger, without performance, just the plain fact of it. "For a while, I was, not about you, or not only about you, about Jordan. About realizing that I'd been in a room with people I trusted and they had been, not what I thought they were." She turned to look at him. "But you don't stay in that place forever. You just don't." He looked at her. Something was moving on his face that she hadn't expected. Something small and honest that might have been, in another version of him, remorse. She was not interested in remorse. She was not interested in the comfort that his having regrets might once have offered her. She was interested, she realized, in very little that Marcus had to offer. That was new. That was, she thought, what being done actually felt like from the inside. His eyes moved past her to the dessert table, where Taeyang was standing with one child on each side, engaged in what appeared to be a negotiation about the number of macarons that constituted a reasonable event serving. Seo-jun was gesturing. Taeyang was unmoving. Hana was watching this exchange as an interested neutral party. "Is that who I think it is?" Marcus said. "My employer?" "Yes." She watched him absorb this and reconfigure and then work to not show that he was reconfiguring. Marcus had always been a person who cared about adjacency, about who you were near, who you were seen with, what it meant about you. She had not always noticed how much that quality had shaped the 3 years they were together. She noticed now. "You work for him. I care for his children. It's wonderful work." She said it cleanly, without apology or irony. "The girl's name is Hana. The boy is Seo-jun. He has very strong opinions about his blazer." She could see Marcus trying to locate the wound and failing. That, she thought, was the thing he had not planned for. He had planned for hurt or anger or the awful brightness of someone trying too hard. He had not planned for a woman who had moved into a life that had nothing to do with him and appeared, from all available evidence, to be all right in it. Jordan appeared at Marcus's side. She materialized the way she always had, smooth, calibrated, reading the room before she entered it fully. She looked at Imani with the specific caution of someone who has run through scenarios. "Imani." Her voice was careful. Shaped. "I'm glad you came." There were 11 months of things Imani could have said. Things she had said, in the dark, to herself. Things that were true and pointed and would have done damage, and she had the vocabulary for damage. She had spent enough time with this grief to know exactly how to use it. But looking at Jordan now, at the calculation still running behind her eyes, even today, even at her own wedding, the perpetual assessment of every room she was in, she found that she didn't want to. Not because Jordan didn't deserve them, because spending them would cost Imani something, and Jordan wasn't worth the price anymore. "It's a beautiful venue," Imani said. "I hope you're really happy together." The kindness of it was more devastating than accusation. She could see Jordan feel it, the particular impact of grace offered where grievance was expected. And then a small hand found her knee, and she looked down, and Hannah was there, having apparently concluded the macaron negotiation and located Imani by radar, looking up at her with great urgency. "Imani, Seo-jun ate 4 macarons, and Daddy said 3 was the limit, but Seo-jun says at celebrations the number is different." Imani crouched to her level. The ease of it, the immediate shift of her whole attention, the way the rest of the room receded, was instinct by now. "He's not wrong about celebrations," she said, "but let's go check on him anyway." She took Hannah's hand. She stood. She did not look back. It happened during dinner, in the pause between the toasts, in the particular stillness of a room full of people managing champagne flutes and half attention. They were at a table near the edge of the terrace, positioned with the view at their backs and the room in front of them, an arrangement Tae-yang had made without explaining, and she hadn't questioned. The children were doing well, which in 4-year-old terms meant they were managing formal dinner with only occasional infractions. Seo-jun had conducted a thorough assessment of the bread rolls and found them acceptable. Hannah had rearranged the centerpiece flowers to her personal aesthetic preferences, which no one had sanctioned but also no one had stopped. Both of them were eating. No one was crying. By any objective measure, this was a success. Imani was cutting Seo-jun's chicken when she looked up and found Marcus watching her. Not the table, her, specifically. The way she had the knife in her hand, the easy automatic competence of it, the way Seo-jun leaned against her arm as she worked. There was something on Marcus's face that she hadn't seen there before. Something small and unglamorous and honest, which was unusual for Marcus, who preferred the produced version of his feelings over the real ones. It might have been regret. Not for Jordan. She didn't think that. For this. For the version of a life with her that he had looked at and miscounted. She looked back at her task, not his to have, whatever he was feeling. "You're doing well," Tae-yang said, low. "Not for the table. Please don't. I mean it as an observation, not a comfort." She glanced at him. He was watching her with that expression, the one she'd named for herself in the doorway of the twins' room on that Wednesday night in March, and then immediately unnamed it because naming it was dangerous. The expression of a man who was paying close attention and had stopped pretending, even to himself, that the attention was purely professional. "Earlier," he said, "at the railing with him. You didn't give him anything. I didn't want to. That's not what it looked like." His voice was careful. It looked like someone who had already finished with it, not suppressing something. Finished. She was quiet for a moment. "Maybe I have," she said. "I think maybe I have." She reached for her glass. Her hand was steady. She noted this with something like gratitude. Across the table, Hannah had finished her dinner and migrated, as she always did by degrees, into Imani's space. It started with her chair shifting closer, then her elbow on Imani's arm. Then, in the natural progression of a 4-year-old who considers lap proximity a reasonable goal, she had arranged herself half into Imani's lap, with her head against Imani's shoulder, and her eyes going soft with the beginnings of sleep. Imani put her arms around her without thinking. The same reflex as breathing. The best man had been speaking for some time. His toast was long, affectionate, well-rehearsed, hitting the expected beats. And the room had settled into that particular wedding toast attention, everyone half listening, managing their champagne, performing engagement. At a table near the center, someone laughed at the right moment. The best man paused for effect. In the silence, in the space where a room full of people was holding its breath for the punchline. Maman. Hana said it quietly, not to the room, to Imani. Her face tucked against Imani's shoulder, her voice that particular low, sleepy register of a child going soft at the edges. The word she had been building for weeks from Imani's phone calls with her mother in Florianopolis, from the lullabies Imani thought she sang below hearing, from the sounds of a woman who loved in a specific language even when she was trying to love in another one. But a room that is holding its breath carries sound differently. The word traveled. The table heard it first, then the neighboring table, already half-oriented their way from the evening's accumulated awareness of them. Then, in the spreading quiet that children's voices create in adult rooms, further. Imani did not move. Could not move. This word, in Hana's voice, in this room, at this specific moment, it undid her in a way that none of the evening's planned provocations had managed to touch. The wedding had not broken her. Marcus had not broken her. Jordan's careful performance of happiness had not broken her. 4 years old, half asleep, without guile or strategy, this child had found the place in her that was still soft and had gone straight to it. Hana seemed to feel the change in the air. She lifted her head and looked at Imani with the clear, uncomplicated gaze of a child who has not yet learned that some truths are meant to be withheld. She wasn't asking for reassurance. She was just looking, just being sure that Imani was still Imani. "I know, baby," Imani said. Her voice was not entirely her own. "I know." She pressed her face briefly against Hana's hair and breathed. The smell of the detergent she used on the children's clothes. The particular warmth of a small sleeping body. She breathed until she could. When she looked up, Seo Jun was leaning across the table toward her. He had his hand stretched out the way he did when Hana was upset, and he wanted to help without knowing how. He patted her arm, very specifically and deliberately, the way he did everything. "She's our Imani," he said, in English, for the room, clear as a bell. The simple, total authority of a child stating something that is so obviously true that the only reason to say it is that adults seem to need reminding. The nearest table made a sound. Involuntary, collective. The sound a group of adults makes when a child accidentally says something that costs them nothing and costs everyone listening a great deal. Imani felt tears hit her eyes and refused them. Not here. Not in front of all these people. Not in front of Marcus. Not in front of Jordan. She could cry later. She could cry when she was somewhere private and she had earned it. For now she blinked and held Hana and looked at Seo Jun with everything she had and said, "Yes, I'm your Imani." He nodded with great satisfaction and turned back to his bread roll. She felt Taeyang move before she saw him. Not toward her, just a shift, a repositioning of himself in the space. She looked up. He was looking at her, and he was not managing his expression. That was the thing. For 8 months, she had watched this man manage every expression, contain every response, apply his composure to everything that threatened to get past it. He was not doing that now. He was looking at her with the open, undefended attention of someone who has run out of reasons to pretend not to feel what he feels. His jaw was tight. His hands were very still on the table, under the tablecloth, on the side of her that no one else could see. His hand moved across the linen and rested beside hers. Not touching. 1 centimeter of not touching. An enormous centimeter. The toast ended. Dessert came, was received by the children with the seriousness appropriate to the occasion, and was eaten. The children were fading. Hana fully surrendered to Imani's shoulder, Seo Jun making the increasingly vague gestures of a person who is technically still awake but only by commitment. 2 hours and 4 minutes had passed. They had discussed the timeline in the car. The timeline had been met and slightly exceeded, which Imani chose to consider a personal victory. She was reaching for Hana's small cardigan, the white one with the embroidered edges, which Hana had selected herself and defended from all attempts at substitution, when Marcus appeared at the edge of the table. Alone this time. Without Jordan. Without the managed composure of earlier in the evening. He looked like a man who had been sitting with something across a dinner table for 2 hours and could not hold it any longer. Taeyang, in the process of easing a sleeping Hana from Imani's arms to his own shoulder, looked at Marcus. For the first time all evening, Imani realized this only now, looking back over the night. He had not looked at Marcus until this moment. He had been in the same room as the man who had sent that invitation, and he had simply not granted him the attention of a direct look. Now he did. For one long, measured moment. He said nothing. He simply looked, and then he turned to his daughter and adjusted her carefully against his shoulder, and the statement of that was complete without requiring words. Marcus kept his eyes on Imani. "Can I have a minute?" She handed him that minute, not generosity. She was done with the idea of being generous to Marcus. Curiosity, rather. She had learned something about herself tonight, and she wanted to know if the lesson held. They stepped to the far edge of the terrace, the city spread out below them, the party behind them a warm murmur of voices and music. She stood against the railing and looked at Marcus and waited. "I didn't expect you to be like this," he said. The careful phrasing of someone feeling their way through something they haven't rehearsed. "Like what?" "Like this." He gestured, helplessly. "Like you're fine. Like all of it. Like none of it. I thought you'd be angry." "At least angry." "I was angry," she said. "For a long time. It's a very clean anger, that kind. The kind where someone does something unambiguous. It was almost easy to be angry. It was the other things that were harder." He looked at her. She let him look. "I sent the invitation because you wanted to know if I was okay or because you wanted to know if I wasn't." A long pause. Below them, a taxi crossed an intersection. A cluster of people moved between streetlights. The city did what the city does. It continued, completely indifferent. A long pause. Then, quietly, "Both." She looked at him. There was something in the honesty of it that she hadn't expected. Something that made him, briefly, more like the person she had actually loved, and less like the person she had spent 11 months revising. It made her sad in a small, uncomplicated way. Not for herself. For both of them. For the younger versions of them who had started something with better intentions than they had finished it. "Marcus," she said, and her voice was the kind that only exists on the other side of all the unkind feelings. "I hope you're happy. Genuinely. Not because you deserve the hope. I'm not sure about that. But because unhappy people don't stop making the choices that hurt other people. They just feel worse about them. And Jordan made a real sacrifice to be here. She lost me. I hope at least it turns out to have been worth it." He absorbed that. She watched it land. His eyes moved past her to Taeyang, who was standing 30 feet away with Hana asleep against his shoulder, and Seojun now also leaning against his side, vertical but barely, held up primarily by Taeyang's hand. He looked like a man who was doing 3 things at once with the calm of someone who has long since made peace with the complexity of his life. "He's good to you," Marcus said. She turned and looked. Really looked. Not with the habitual sideways awareness she had been maintaining for 8 months, the deliberate peripheral attention of someone who has decided not to look directly at something, but fully, openly. She looked at Taeyang, standing in the golden light of a Manhattan rooftop with his children, who were also hers, and she felt the truth of it settle in her chest, like something that had been waiting for exactly this moment to be acknowledged. "He's my employer," she said, and then, because she was done with small dishonesty, "But yes." She walked away from Marcus for the last time. Not with anger, not with grief, with the particular lightness of a door that has been closed from the inside. Hana was fully asleep before the elevator reached the lobby. Seojun maintained consciousness through the lobby, through the revolving door, through the first 12 feet of sidewalk, and then sat down on the curb with the absolute finality of a child who has decided that the physical act of forward movement is no longer available to him. Not distress, not tantrum. Simply a full and peaceful cessation. Taeyang, without comment, transferred Hana to Imani's arms, the handoff smooth and practiced, the particular competence of two people who had done this in various configurations many times, and picked Seo-jun up off the curb and settled him against his chest. Seo-jun grabbed the lapel of his father's suit jacket with both hands and held on, and Taeyang put a hand on his back, and they stood there on the sidewalk outside a midtown hotel while Manhattan moved around them, and for a moment nobody needed to go anywhere. The car took them home through the city at its night pace, slower, more measured, the traffic lighter. Both children were asleep within 10 minutes. The city slid past the windows in the particular way it does at that hour. All light and motion through glass, the real city and its reflection layered on top of each other. The silence between her and Taeyang was different from the silence in the car on the way there. The silence going had been preparatory. The silence coming back was the kind that exists after something that cannot be undone, and is sitting with that. She's been working on that word for 3 weeks, he said, without preamble. Hana. She picks up language from everything around her. Your calls with your mother. The songs you sing in the kitchen when you think no one is listening. She came to me 2 weeks ago and asked me what it meant. Imani looked at him. What did you tell her? I told her it was the word for a very important person. He paused. She accepted that. She's been using it quietly, in private. I didn't know she would say it tonight. Not like that. Are you apologizing? No. Quietly. I'm explaining. There's a difference. She looked out the window. Their mother, she said, not as a question. A long pause. When he spoke, his voice had changed. Not broken, but the architecture of it was different. The composure present, but thinner at the edges. Hyunji. She passed when they were 14 months old. A cardiac condition. One we knew about. One we'd been told was manageable. It wasn't. He looked at the sleeping children. She was extraordinary. Funny. In this very dry way that surprised people who expected something softer. She would have liked you, I think. She had no patience for performance. Imani said nothing. She knew that some things needed to be said into silence. For a long time, he continued. I thought the most important thing I could do for them was to be enough, to fill the space adequately. I made schedules, hired the right people, was present in all the measurable ways. He stopped. And then you came. And Hana started cutting her eggs into triangles. Imani felt the shift before she understood it. Hyunji had a thing about egg shapes, he said. Hana was 14 months when her mother died. She cannot have remembered this. There is no mechanism by which she should know it. And yet she started doing it 3 weeks after you arrived. And when I asked her why, she said she just liked it that way. The car moved through the city in the quiet way of late-night travel. Just the hum of the engine and the breathing of sleeping children, and this conversation happening between them in the dark. I watch you with them, Taeyang said, and his voice was now doing the thing it almost never did. It was simply saying what was true, without management, without the careful intermediary layer of composure. And I see what I couldn't give them alone. I have never been a person who needed things from other people. I was taught that needing was a form of instability. I ran a company. I raised children. I did not need. A pause. And then I started standing in doorways. She turned to look at him. I know you've seen me, he said. You've never said anything. I've noticed that you've never said anything. It wasn't my place. No. He met her eyes. But I think it might be now. And I think, tonight, in that room, when she said that word, I think I understood something that I had been working very hard not to understand. Which was that I am no longer standing in the doorway because I'm afraid of the room. The light at Park and 63rd went red. The city paused. Between them, in the charged quiet, something shifted in the way that things shift when two people stop navigating around each other and simply stop. I said it was both, Imani said softly, referring to the car, to his question, to the answer she had given that had been, she suspected, the truest thing she had said all evening. You did. I meant it. The light changed. They didn't. They carried the children upstairs in the particular quiet of a night that has earned its quiet. Tai-yang took Seo-jun, who did not wake but gripped his father's collar with the tenacity of a child who has held on in sleep before and knows the importance of it. Imani took Hana, whose head rested against her shoulder with total trust. They moved through the penthouse without turning on the overhead lights, navigating by the ambient glow of the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and down the hallway to the children's room with the practiced silence of people who have done this often enough that they do not need to coordinate. Seo-jun went down first, on his back, the blazer still on. Tai-yang considered the blazer for a moment. He unbuttoned it, the correct buttons, gently, and draped it over the chair beside the bed. He covered his son with the blanket and stood there for a breath. Across the room, Imani settled Hana and smoothed her hair back and tucked the blanket in at the sides the way Hana preferred. Snug, secure, like she was held even in sleep. She did this without thinking. 8 months of small kindnesses that had become reflex. She straightened, turned. Tai-yang was in the doorway. That old position, the doorway. But the expression was different. Entirely different from what she had seen there on all those nighttime occasions. He wasn't looking in with the careful, shuttered grief of a man who loves from outside rooms. He was looking at her. She crossed the room. They moved together out of the doorway and into the hallway, pulling the door to its usual position, not closed, never fully closed, and stood in the quiet of the penthouse at 11 at night, both of them still in the clothes from a wedding that had started as a wound and ended as something entirely else. "Can we sit for a bit?" she said. They went to the kitchen. He made tea, Korean barley, which he kept specifically because she'd mentioned once, in passing, in the way she mentioned things that she didn't expect him to retain, that she'd had it at a restaurant in the West Village and loved it. She didn't say anything about the fact that he had remembered. She sat at the counter and watched him move through the kitchen, and thought about how different the same space could be depending on what was filling it. He set the cup in front of her and stood on the other side of the counter with his own. The marble counter between them. The quiet between them. The whole accumulated weight of the evening between them. "I want to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to not be my employer while I'm saying it." He looked at her steadily. "Okay." "When Marcus left," she said, "I thought the worst thing about it was losing him. It took me months to realize that wasn't actually what had broken me. What broke me was what I concluded about myself from it, that I gave things to people who looked at what I gave and decided it wasn't what they wanted, that I was the kind of person who could be loved and then moved past, someone that people chose as a stepping stone without telling her that's what she was." She looked at her tea. "I came to work for you believing that, carrying that. I was very professional and very competent, and I kept everything at exactly the right distance because I had learned, recently, what happened when you didn't. And your children..." She stopped. She looked up at him. "Your children just decided I was theirs. No negotiation, no conditions. Hana decided the first week, I think. Seo-jun held out until the 4th week, because he always needs more data, and once they decided..." She shook her head, very slightly. "It undid something in me that I had been very careful to keep knotted." He was very still. He had both hands around his cup and his eyes on her face, and he was not managing anything. "And I've watched you," she continued. "I've watched you figure out how to be both parents to children who can't explain what they're missing. I've watched you learn Seo-jun's 20-minute cry threshold and the specific angle that Hana needs her blanket, and how to talk about their mother to them in a way that doesn't ask them to grieve what they can't remember. I've watched you make mistakes and correct them without drama. I've watched you stand in that doorway night after night and love your children from the only position that felt safe, which was outside of the full weight of it. His jaw moved. I have never said any of this, she said, because it was not my place to say, and because I was afraid of what it meant that I'd noticed. But I'm tired of things going unsaid that are true. I have spent 8 months being very careful about what I allowed myself, and tonight a 4-year-old said a word, and I understood that careful is just another word for scared. She wrapped her hands around her cup and met his eyes and did not look away. And I'm not telling you this because I expect anything, she said. I'm telling you because it's true, and I'm done carrying true things in silence. He moved. Slowly, deliberately, the way he did everything. He came around the counter. He stopped beside her, close, and she looked up at him and saw what was on his face and stopped breathing for a moment. I have not wanted anything for 3 years, he said. His voice was low and careful and entirely real. I built a very effective life around the absence of wanting. I was good at it. I ran a company across 4 time zones and raised 2 children, and I did not want. And then you came and made omelets on Monday mornings, and I started wanting things, and I treated it as a management problem. And now? And now you told me it was both, in the car, and I have been unable to treat that as a management problem. You said you'd tell me when you couldn't be professional. I remember. A beat, I'm telling you. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the city, 42 floors below, a siren rose and fell. In the twins' room, 2 children slept in the sound sleep of people who know where they are and feel safe there. I know the complications, he said. I know what this means for your role and for the children, and I am not pretending those things don't exist. But I am asking, not for resolution, not for promises. I am asking if you are willing to stop pretending this does not exist, between us. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the woman who had opened that invitation 4 days ago. She thought about what it had taken to walk into that room tonight. She thought about Hannah's voice in the pause between toasts, saying a word that traveled further than she knew, and the particular truth of children who love without calculation. I have been pretending for 8 months, she said. I am exhausted by it. He reached out, slowly, giving her every opportunity to decide, and covered her hand with his. Just that. The weight of his hand over hers, warm, deliberate, the first fully honest gesture of the 8 months she had known him. And the simplicity of it after everything, after the wedding, and the speeches in the city, and the word in the car, and all the months of careful distance, was so enormous and so uncomplicated that she laughed. A small, involuntary, entirely undignified laugh, the kind that surprises itself. He made a sound in response, low and short and startled. Not a laugh, not quite, but in the vicinity. Coming from him, it was significant. What? Nothing. Just... She turned her palm up under his. You put your hand on my back tonight. At the wedding, in front of a room full of people. I did. Was that professional? He considered it with the gravity of a man reviewing an important question. No, that was not professional. So, you weren't professional first. I was not professional first. She looked up at him. He was looking at her with the expression she had been cataloging for 8 months and refusing to name. And now she named it, simply and entirely, because she was done with the refusal. Okay, quietly, then, he agreed. They stayed in the kitchen for another hour, not in the resolution of things. Nothing was resolved, really. The shape of what they were to each other was just beginning to have edges they could map. But in the beginning of it, in the simple extraordinary fact of 2 people who have been careful for a long time choosing Ajay together to be a little less careful. They talked, really talked, the way they hadn't in 8 months of living in adjacent rooms. About Hyunji, about the years before Imani arrived, about what the twins had needed and what Tai Yang had discovered he couldn't give them alone. about what Marcus had taken, and what Imani had slowly, unexpectedly, found again. About the future, which neither of them was ready to design, but both of them were, for the first time, willing to imagine. When she finally went to her room, it was past midnight. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen the way he stood in the doorway of the twins' room, just for a moment, looking back at a space that meant something, taking it in before the day closed. He was still at the counter, hands around his cup, watching her go. "Good night, Taeyang," she said. "Good night, Imani." She went to her room and lay in the dark and thought, I didn't know it would feel like this. I didn't know it could. On a Friday morning in January, with snow falling in the particular slow, purposeful way of New York winter, each flake apparently committed to the performance, Imani was making French toast. It was Hannah's day. Triangles. She hadn't forgotten. She heard them before she saw them. The small two-part thunder of feet on hardwood. The sound she had come to associate with Friday mornings, which the children had understood for some time to be French toast mornings, and therefore required expedient deployment of themselves from bed to kitchen. Seo-jun arrived first because he always did. He moved fast even in pajamas, even in January, with the focused energy of a child who has a destination. Hannah was 3 steps behind, her hair impossible from sleep, her expression one of supreme morning seriousness. "Can we help?" Seo-jun said. Not a question, a statement. This had been his approach for the past month. Wash your hands first. They went to the sink with the urgency of children who have a task. Imani got out the small bowl, Hannah's bowl, the yellow one she had designated for this purpose, and the eggs, and waited. Hannah cracked the first egg with the concentration of a surgeon. She had been working on this for 6 weeks, and the improvement was real, though the process still required Imani's hands nearby, not interfering, just present. The shell came apart cleanly. Hannah looked at the bowl, then at Imani, with the expression of someone who has achieved something and needs it witnessed. "Perfect," Imani said. Hannah nodded. "I know." Seo-jun was already stirring the milk in the other bowl with the physical commitment he brought to everything. Imani had stopped suggesting that vigorous stirring and effective stirring were not the same thing. Some lessons needed to be discovered independently. She heard Taeyang's footsteps. She still noticed them, the specific sound of him moving through his own apartment. But it no longer felt like something she was doing by accident. She noticed it the way you notice the sounds of your house, with belonging. He came into the kitchen, and the morning rearranged itself around him the way it always did now. He went to the coffee first. This was consistent and non-negotiable, and the children had learned to respect it as a sequencing requirement. And poured his cup, and turned and leaned against the counter, and looked at the 3 of them at the stove. The look on his face was not the look she had catalogued for 8 careful months. It was the other one. The one that had started, slowly and then all at once, the morning after the wedding, when he had come into the kitchen and seen her at the stove and not composed himself before she turned. It was the look of a man who has stopped managing something and is simply, quietly, allowing it to be true. "Seo-jun," he said. "That's a great deal of enthusiasm for milk." "It has to be combined," Seo-jun explained, with the patience of someone addressing a frequently misunderstood position. "It is combined. It was combined 30 seconds ago. More combined is better." Taeyang looked at Imani. She looked at him. The thing that passed between them took no time and needed no language. It was the specific silent exchange of 2 adults who were raising children together and have found, in the shared witnessing of this particular brand of 4-year-old logic, something close to joy. He shook his head. She turned back to the stove so he wouldn't see her smile. Hannah had finished the second egg, also clean, also celebrated, and turned to present the bowl to Taeyang for inspection. He took it with appropriate seriousness, examined it. He examined the bowl with appropriate seriousness. Excellent technique. "Imani taught me," Hannah said. The way she said it, matter of fact, without emphasis. The simple attribution of a child who does not understand that the statement is doing any particular work, landed somewhere in Tai Yang's chest. Imani saw it happen. She saw him receive it and hold it and do nothing to manage it away. I know. He looked at Imani over the rim of his cup. She's very good at that. They ate at the kitchen table, the four of them, in the warm noise of a Friday morning. Snow fell outside the windows. Seojun's blazer was present in spirit only. Imani had successfully argued for a ceasefire on the blazer at breakfast, on grounds of egg incident probability. But it was on its chair at the table, because compromise. Hana's triangles were perfect. The French toast had come out better than usual, which Hana attributed to the eggs being more combined. Nobody argued with her. Midway through the meal, while the children were deep in a conversation about whether Snow had feelings, and if so, what feelings specifically, Tai Yang's hand found Imani's under the table. The same movement as in the car, 3 months ago. His hand over hers, then her palm turning up to meet him, then the simple interlacing of something that had taken 8 months to allow itself to be what it was. She didn't make a thing of it. The children were discussing whether Snow was happy or just cold, and required no adult input on this matter. She held his hand under the table and listened to her children argue about the emotional life of precipitation and thought, this is what it feels like. Not the arrival of something dramatic. Not the thunderclap. Just this. The ordinary, extraordinary morning. The table and the snow, and the small hands waving to make a point. The person beside you whose hand knows how to find yours without looking. This is what it feels like to have landed somewhere. Marcus sent that invitation expecting to remind Imani of what she had lost. He gave her instead the evening that changed the direction of everything. Not because his cruelty was a gift, but because cruelty never gets to determine the end of the story. It just gets to be the thing that the story moved through on the way to something better. Tai Yang. O had spent 3 years building walls with the discipline of a man who believes that the things he needs cannot be lost if he never needs them. And then a woman came and made omelets on Monday mornings, and taught his daughter to crack eggs, and stood in a kitchen on a Tuesday with a burning pan and an invitation that was meant to break her. And he looked at her and understood, in the particular way that things become clear when you stop working so hard to make them opaque, that he had been wrong about what the walls were protecting. And Hana O, who was 4 years old and had never in her life known her mother, said a word in a crowded room, because it was true, and she knew it was true, and she did not see any reason to hold true things in silence. She was the wisest person at the table. She always had been. If this story found you, if there was a moment that you felt, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments which part got you. Was it the rooftop? The word? The kitchen at midnight? Tell me. And if you're new here, this is the kind of story we tell. Subscribe. The next one is already waiting. See you there.